Hey, in our podcast today, we're going to talk about the disturbing realities of higher education in America. A recent study just came out highlighting the amount of social conformity, the amount of ideological pressure that's put on young people today to conform or else. What we're finding is many young people don't believe in what's being taught to them, but they're too afraid to say anything for fear of social isolation or bad grades. This is not how higher education should be. What we need is to raise young people with a Christian worldview that have deep convictions and have the courage to live out those convictions. That's not what higher education is producing today. So we're going to talk about what we can do about that in our podcast today.
Welcome to the Ron Johnson Discipleship Podcast.
We're so glad you're here with us again. Me and my trusted sidekick here, Pastor Andrew. We are going to talk about some amazing things today that are happening in higher education. And I want to pick up where we left off last week. We were talking about the principle that culture is downstream of politics, meaning that what we're currently seeing on the evening news and all the political squabbles that are happening in Washington, D.C. and our hyper-polarized environment there are really downstream of the cultural shaping institutions that are forming worldviews and creating people's ideas and shaping them from an early age. And so if you don't deal with the institutions and reforming institutions, you have nothing but political squabbles. And we talked last week about how Donald Trump understands that. Others have also understood it. I think, as you pointed out, Barack Obama understood it. If you're looking to win in the long game, in terms of cultural reformation, you cannot ignore institutions. And so a couple examples we gave last episode, we talked about the Smithsonian museums, where President Trump issued a directive to basically get your act together and clean up all the progressive, leftist, divisive nonsense and celebrate America. And that the displays, the exhibits should not be written from a progressive, leftist, Marxist, we hate America, we hate Western Civ approach, but they should be things that we celebrate as Americans. They should be things that pull us together, not things that divide us. Also, the Kennedy Center with some of the perverted, nasty stuff that they were promoting with under taxpayer dollars, and saying, you know what, this is President Trump spoke with, prophetic authority. This is going to stop, and we're just saying, Trump gets it. If we don't get back higher education, the military, the family, the church, all of these things, we're playing a very nearsighted game. We're going to lose.
Media and journalist, TV.
Yeah. The list goes on and on
NRP, and on. Or not NRP. NPR.
No, Trump's not getting rid of the network of related pastors. I did the same thing with PBS and all the alphabets. And again, we applaud his bold leadership. It's interesting. Those on the opposition call him a fascist and a dictator and trying to be a king, when all he's doing is providing moral authority and using the authority that he has to address some of these issues. And that leads us to where we want to go today. We want to talk about higher education. Now, you and I are both pretty familiar with higher education. You've spent many years, you have lots of years in colleges, universities, and study. I have the same. We both have degrees and all of that. I found that college, from a Christian worldview perspective, was a place where we could go, talk about ideas, have open dialogue, discussion, disagree with the professor on certain points, or at least have some good pushback. And that's kind of the nature of what higher education is supposed to be. You're pursuing truth. You're doing it in an atmosphere of people with eager minds and hearts. You're at an age where you're trying to explore what you do believe. And we talked about this. The purpose of education is really to help mold and shape one's worldview. And so I found that when I went off to college, it kind of took me out of, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but we all have our little bubbles in which we were raised, right? Depending on what part of the country you came from, what kind of family you came from. And then you go off to college and you go, oh, wait, you believe differently than I believe, or you have a different perspective than I have. And so I'm forced to listen to you, and then that helps me grow in my understanding of the world and of everything's not all black and white. There's some gray out there. The world is a complex place. There's lots of different people, lots of different ideas, but it forces you to at least, come into touch with people and ideas that are different than yours. And then at the end of the day, after you wrestle with all that, you land on some solid ground and you have your own convictions and that you wrestled with and intellectually, and you come up with, okay, this is what I believe. That's not happening in higher education today. We're seeing just the opposite. And so this study came out, which we want to talk about today. It was done by a gentleman by the name of Forrest Rahm and his associate Kevin Waldman. That was conducted between 2023 and 2025 at Northwestern University, just to the north of us in Chicago, and the University of Michigan. And this study reveals a chilling reality. Students are hiding their true beliefs to navigate the social and academic minefields of ideological conformity. This study was based on confidential interviews with just under 1,500 undergraduates, and the study uncovers a pervasive culture of self-censorship driven by fear of social ostracism and academic penalty. As the researchers starkly note, quote, "We are not studying politics, we are studying development." And yet what they found is a generation that was, quote, "not maturing, but merely managing." So let's talk about that. A conform to the ideology or be cast out, self-censorship, fear of social ostracism, and fear of simply being penalized academically for holding the wrong view. This is what we're talking about, the need for institutional change. If that atmosphere is not addressed by somebody, we are not producing well-rounded graduates. We're producing cowering, fearful students who are lying about what they really believe just simply to get by. And so this is interesting. The data says it all. Have you ever pretended, this was a question, have you ever pretended to hold a more progressive view than you truly endorse to succeed socially or academically? How many of the students said yes to that? Ready for this? 88% of students admitted that they pretended to hold a view that they didn't have just simply to not deal with conflict or to be ostracized or to be penalized academically. 88%. That's crazy. He says here, the result is not conviction. In other words, finding what you truly believe, but compliance. So this is amazing. So if 88% of students lie about their beliefs, what that tells me is the appearance that our universities are pumping out all these liberal grads who share this progressive viewpoint is really an illusion, because 88% of those students, according to this survey, are lying just to get by. On the one hand, it's encouraging to me because sometimes we get this idea that college graduates are all, radicals, left-wing radicals, but maybe they're just left-wing pretenders. Maybe they're just trying to survive, and really there's hope for America because they don't really believe what they've been taught.
Well, the problem is they keep pretending as they get their jobs, because they get their law firm.
That is a problem.
In New York, they go work for Silicon Valley. They work for Salesforce in Indianapolis and Eli Lilly. I'm calling all these big corporations out. And what they did is they go to those corporations and they're going to ask the same HR questions. And they were just pretending from one pretend to another pretend. Eventually you become adherents. You become zealots in this because you get sucked into it until you have kids and get married, and you're like, oh, wait, reality is a little different when you have kids. But
you bring up a good point, because the same folks who are leading in our universities, they share the same ideology with those who are leading in corporate America right now, in many cases. And so you'd actually deal with the same challenges of ideological conformity or else.
Yeah.
So, if you hold, I remember not too long ago here in Indiana when a good friend of mine lost his job at a law firm. He was HR or PR for that law firm. And because he had the wrong view of marriage and actually had a vocal public view on marriage in the state, he was fired from his job for simply having the wrong opinion, ideological conformity. So this peer pressure is not just something that teenagers deal with. This is something college students deal with, and it's certainly something, as you pointed out, they're going to have to deal with as adults when they get into the workplace, especially corporate America and other places that are known to be liberal. We also talked about the fact that in our, and this is true across the board, in our public universities, from left to right on a continuum, the vast majority, super majority of professors hold leftist views, anti-Western civ views. And so, you're sending your kids off into a lion's den as Christians to state universities, knowing that the people that are going to be shaping your child's worldview do not have the worldview that you try to train your kids in growing up.
Yeah. So what this speaks to me is we have some really bad teachers. Now, let me say it this way. I'm sure there are Christian or religious school that's very, very intolerant also, and you cannot bring any other perspective in. I've been a teacher for 10 years, and I can very quickly tell when someone has different, one of my students had very different views from me. And it takes precision, it takes balance, it takes self-control to be able to articulate a point, but do it in a way that the other person don't feel like they're going to be ostracized if they hold the other viewpoint from you. Right. It takes a lot of work to do that. And I don't ever want to be a bully. I don't ever want to bully anyone to say something. The fact that someone will agree with me just because they feel pressure to, it insults me. Does that make sense? I'd rather you disagree, just tell me to my face. I'll respect that more than you just say, yeah.
This is the Christian understanding of tolerance.
Yeah.
True tolerance.
True tolerance.
Like, I want to listen to you. I want to hear you out. Let's talk about this. We might land on the opposite side of the issue, but I'm not going to attack you personally. I'm not going to get aggressive. I'm not going to get in your face. I'm not going to report you to the dean because you have a different view than me.
And also because I'm in the position of power as a teacher. Yeah. And I know myself. I'm very opinionated.
No, I find you to be very... Yeah.
I'm not the most reasonable person to get along with. So knowing that about myself, I have to take extra step that when I share my things and my conviction to do it in a delicate way that the other person doesn't feel walked over. That is what a good educator should do, especially when they hold really strong conviction, controversial strong conviction, and I hold a lot of those. But, I just feel like, in this example just tells me that these professors just feel like, they're entitled. They just say whatever they want, and if you disagree with me, who cares? Then I'm going to belittle you. You're wrong. I'm right. I'm going to train you and teach you to believe what I believe. And even though I believe what I believe is correct, I don't want a person to pretend that way.
Right.
So I hope universities see this and they're convicted. Well, I know they won't, but to see that they are being bad teachers. So that's my take on that.
No, and I remember in Indiana when we were dealing with the whole marriage issue. What should be taught at our universities or whatever. There was no open dialogue on the same-sex marriage issue on our university, our public campuses. You would think that because of the nature of the debate, this is a national issue. It was in the forefront of media. You would think a place like Indiana University would invite speakers in from diverse perspectives to share their viewpoint. Instead, what happened is the Board of Regents or whomever, I forget who the decision-making group was. I know the president was leading the way. But basically, they came out with a statement that if you come to Indiana University, we support same-sex marriage. And if you don't, you're a bigot. And you need to know that before you come here. It was basically their approach. And I sat there thinking, what has happened to higher education to where this should have been an incredible opportunity to discuss discuss some of the moral issues and public policy issues of our time. There should have been a lot of open debate, feedback, a lot of listening, looking at data, sharing your position. I mean, this is what higher education used to be, debating points back and forth, talking about public policy implications. I mean, all kinds of stuff that could have happened. Instead, there was just this fiat, thus saith the president. This is Indiana University's position on this issue, which again I thought was blasphemous to the whole mission of public education. We missed an incredible opportunity for shared dialogue, and certainly in an atmosphere that would have been respectful and so forth and so on. That's not happening. And so I want to share another important discovery here. According to the research, 78% of students self-censor on gender identity. So they're not buying it. They don't believe in the whole concept. They think it's silly, but they're not going to say anything about it. Because they know you can't touch gender identity. That is a hot button topic.
Religious.
It is. It's a
religious creed.
Same thing, 77% on politics. So God forbid that you go to a liberal state university and you happen to be a fan of President Trump and you wear a shirt that supports President Trump, you might be abused. You might be beat up. You'll certainly be verbally abused. You might even be told that you need to take the shirt off to come into class because it's unacceptable. And so, again, 77% of our students self-censor on politics, 68% on family values. So this means that students aren't buying it, but they're just keeping quiet because they do not want to be ostracized. An alarming 80% admit to submitting classwork that misrepresents their beliefs to align with the professor's expectations, a practice so ingrained that it's become second nature for many. So here again, the point is you're not writing your paper on what you believe. You're simply writing a paper showing the professor that you completely support his or her views on the issue so that you can get an A. Because you're afraid if you come at it at a different angle or you share something that disagrees with the professor's viewpoint, you're going to get a lower grade. And if you get a lower grade, you might not get accepted into law school or wherever else that you're wanting to go, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, you're competing for internships. There's only a certain spot. The professor is going to go for the person who they get along with. They do better. They share the similar worldviews.
Or in the area of counseling.
Sure.
Say you believe that homosexuality is a sin, and now you're asked, well, what will you do if a gay person comes in and meets with you as a counselor? And you say, well, I don't believe their lifestyle is right. Well, I'm sorry, you're no longer accepted in the area of counseling because you violated the ethics of the counseling community. Blah 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 blah. I mean, you're literally looking at being blacklisted from a lot of professions just because of your beliefs. Anything I've said this before from our pulpit. Anything with the word public in front of it means that there's an ideology behind that if you go against that ideology, you will not be accepted. Imagine you're a scientist who actually believes that the Bible is true and believes that the Genesis account is accurate, and you don't believe in evolution. You can't say that. You cannot let that out of your mouth in higher education today because you will be blacklisted and you will have no future at all as a scientist. This is what we're talking about.
Just on a side note, if someone's very open about their faith in public university or they graduate law school or they got their PhDs, you kind of know they're really good because they have to be.
Oh, yeah.
They have to be really good. You can graduate a prestigious law school and you're an outspoken Christian. You know that guy. You should hire that guy. Because he graduated despite...
he had to fight. He had to climb uphill the whole way.
Yeah.
So not only does he have a great mind, but there's probably a lot of great character in that person.
And he got to be diplomatic, but also speak the truth. Though you know that's a high level individual when someone goes through that.
Now, this is really sad. It says here, unfortunately, the fragmentation, talking about this compartmentalization of what you really believe, your private views versus your public views. He says this fragmentation doesn't end at the classroom door. 73% of the respondents confess that they don't even trust having conversations about these values with close friends. Nearly half said they routinely conceal beliefs in intimate relationships for fear of ideological fallout. The authors describe this as identity regulation at scale, and it is being institutionalized. So this is sad. We talk about, the left likes to talk about being authentic and being the real you and sharing your feelings and, embracing who you are. But this goes against all of that, because as soon as you share a viewpoint that goes against that ideology, you are immediately, again, punished, ostracized, whatever. And so here you got young people. This is crazy. 73% don't even have conversations about these important issues with their friends because they're afraid of the relational fallout that's going to happen. Which is crazy. I mean, we saw this. It's mental illness at its best. We saw this where if your friend voted for Donald Trump, you're no longer my friend. Remember all the liberal TikTok venting that was taking place, temper tantrums, where I'm not going to associate with you, and I'm not going to invite you over for Thanksgiving this year, family members, because you hold a political viewpoint that differs from mine.
Yeah, and I would say you got to choose your friend better. If the person rejects you because of something like that, I'm like, then they're really not your friend. So it kind of just exposes who they really are. So for me, no loss. Yeah, but think I'm not being very compassionate about it.
But you're an adult who is a thinker, and you've processed through a lot of these things. As we pointed out, it's really unfair that our institutions bully like this and create this hostile environment, because the purpose of education is to help a young person shape their worldview. This is one of the largest arguments for homeschooling or Christian education. On the one hand, we hear parents say, hey, well, we want to send our Christian kids off to public school because we want them to evangelize, right? We want them to share their faith. If you take all the Christians out, it's going to be a very dark place. And I get that side of the argument. The other side of the argument is, why in the world am I sending my kids to an environment that's designed to shape their worldview when the worldview that they're being taught isn't Christian at all? In fact, there's nothing of Christ in that environment. So how is it that we're expecting students to share their faith if they're still forming their worldview? It's kind of unfair to put that kind of responsibility on a young person unless we've equipped them.
And this is, again, and there's probably a lack of true equipping at home. Many parents don't think on those levels, or are not qualified, or don't have these discussions with their kids about it. Now, my question is, at a public university, government funded by taxpayers, in my mind, the university should kind of share the demographic of the state that's supporting them, right? You talk about Indiana University. Indiana is by far and large a conservative state. So why is it? Now, the problem is higher education always trend left. I don't know always, and last couple hundred years, maybe trend left. Even the Christian university, I'm calling out like Wheaton.
Oh, yeah.
And whatever, Indiana Wesleyan. I'm calling them all out. Trend way left. Now, if the Christian, you talk about private Christian education trends left, how much more than the public I'm not even talking about the Harvards and the Yales. I'm talking about Indiana University, which is a good university. But
let's just stop there.
Yeah.
You brought up a good point. Indiana has a conservative supermajority politically. And we say that politics is downstream of culture. So how did that group of people get elected? It's because the majority of people in this state share those values. And then you go off to IU, which is a great example.
Yeah.
And you do not find anything close.
Yeah, it's like a
to
whole
a representation
different world
of the state and the people in the state.
Yeah.
And so, again, we have a problem. Like,
education just trends that way. I don't think it was like this. Like university back when they first founded university was not like that. It was founded for the purpose and glory of God. I don't know where education went along, because my whole argument is even Christian university trend left. Even your regent, remember, had the controversy because they didn't want Mike Pence to come and speak at the graduation.
Well, that was my undergrad.
Not regent. I'm sorry. Taylor University. I'm sorry. So there is something about education that we gotta it's not a place, exactly you said, of intellectual freedom, or it's freedom and really it's really liberalism disguised as freedom.
Right.
So,
well, that's a good point. Okay, so where does intellectual freedom come from? It comes from a Christian worldview.
Yeah.
It comes from religious freedom. It comes from the rights of conscience. If all these things get destroyed, then all we have is these ideological propaganda institutions that actually create conformity without any freedom of thought at all. And that's where we're at today.
Yep.
It says here, students are being trained to perform. In fact, they call this performance morality. In other words, it's just a show. You're actually performing. You're playing another role that's not who you are to get your magic diploma and to be accepted in the process. And I love, this is what Nancy Pearcey, who, again, we've referred to a number of her great works on this podcast, but she is the professor at Houston Christian University. She writes, according to this data, she says, being pressured or coerced to affirm views that you do not really hold creates an internal crisis of integrity, what psychologists call moral injury. Many others who have voiced their concerns have stated that what we're witnessing is a brainwashing tactic and mandated fakery. Pretty strong words. Moral injury. When students are forced to affirm something that they really do not believe in, it creates an internal crisis of integrity. Integrity comes from the word that means whole. And so you want students who are whole. You want students who are truly authentic, and you're not getting that. You're getting fakes. You're getting folks that are performing their morality so that they can get the prize. And that's a terrible place for higher education
now, this
to be.
is what, Northwestern, right?
Northwestern and In
Oh, not in Chicago. In Michigan.
Northwestern in Chicago.
In Chicago.
And University of Michigan. Those two universities.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Anyway, interesting. This whole idea, too, they talk about being true to yourself. Of course, they're violating that because they're producing a bunch of students who aren't true to themselves at all. And this was interesting to me. It's not just the students. We talk about peer pressure as if it's a teenage thing. According to their study, some professors admit that they self-censor to avoid controversy too. So you might have a Christian professor who realizes if they challenge that point or if they share their view too strongly, they might be attacked or called into question or lose their job or not be on the track of tenure. And I mean, they start thinking about all the costs involved if they
Sure.
Share their views. And so it gets to, I guess the last part of this was a challenge, and I thought it was very, very good. So what do you do if you're a Christian, and what do you do if your viewpoint might cost you?
Yeah, it's so peer pressure doesn't end when you get out of middle school.
Yeah, exactly.
In many ways, it might get worse. Even if you're a professor, if you want to get your tenure, you want to get your pension. It doesn't end there. And so I was thinking about something differently. What do you do as a Christian? Well, I mean, as a Christian parent, I need to be aware of this. I mean, I think most Christian parents are very aware. I think there's a reason why many parents are thinking about homeschool, or not even sending our kids to college, and say, hey, why don't you get a trade degree instead? Why don't you go work for someone instead? Or go do community college or online college instead? One of the major reasons for this, this mass exodus from universities.
Absolutely. And I think, we've got to teach our young people how to have convictions. Convictions are things that you hold on to and that are worth living and dying for. And then it takes courage to live out those convictions. But I think, you can't expect a young person to have a conviction if they've never been equipped to have a conviction. I love all the stories in the Bible, like Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, bow down or else. And they're like, sorry, we can't. Or I'm thinking about the apostles, you have to quit preaching Jesus or else. And they're like, hey, if you expect us to obey you rather than God, you got another thing coming.
Well, here's the tricky part, because a lot of these Christian college campus lean left also. Because so you got these Christian kids who are, love Jesus, on fire for God, go to university, and all of a sudden their love for Jesus means accepting everyone for who they are.
Right.
That is the main issue, because no one's saying, hey, if you don't bow down on Jesus, when on fire, you'll give you an F.
Right.
They're saying it's all the other issues that these kids have never been trained on, and that these issues are downstream from biblical worldview. But that connection has never been made.
Oh, in fact, we've seen this over and over again. The number of people, of Christians who have a biblical worldview is under 10%.
Yeah.
Way under 10%. So, again, we're not doing a good job of shaping a true Christian worldview in our people, in the people sitting in church every Sunday. And that's been a burden of mine. We did the worldview class here for 4 consecutive weeks, couple hours a night. Had good feedback from that. But that's really just a beginning. How to teach people to read the Bible and then connect the principles of the Bible to everyday life. And then how to see, if you're, for instance, a medical doctor, you should be on the cutting edge of speaking out against transgender mutilation, or the sanctity of life issues, because you understand that that's a life. You understand, that we need to protect life and not kill human beings. So in other words, you have to understand who you are in Christ, and then understand how to apply that to the marketplace. If you're a business leader, if you're a doctor, if you're an educator, and it takes courage. My dad did this. He was a public school teacher for 35 years, and he boldly shared his faith. And when he was challenged about sharing his faith one time, he said to the superintendent, who happened to be a Jewish man, he said, well, because my dad had Christian, posters and things in his classroom in the public school. And the administrator came in and said, is it possible for you to take those down so that you're not offensive to students who maybe don't share that view? And my dad said, well, you know what? The teacher across the hallway is having an affair with the lady down the hallway, and comes in hungover on most Monday mornings, and the students all know what's going on. So, how is it okay for that person to live out their worldview, but it's not okay for me to live out my worldview? And the professor or the administrator said, okay, well, thank you. Because my dad was a good teacher. Yeah. The students were learning, and he wasn't asked to stop being a Christian in the public school.
And the administrator don't want to deal with that mess of the affair.
Well, that might be part of it too. I don't want to pick a fight. Most administrators are just looking for peace, right?
Yep.
And the problem is the Christians are usually the peaceful ones, so we usually cave in.
Yeah.
And because we don't want to rock the boat. But there are certain things, I guess we're trying to say, that you got to rock the boat on that really matter. And I found this to be true. Courage is caught, not taught. So when you see somebody standing up for what matters, and that they're paying a price for that, it inspires people to act. And I think that's what young people are looking for. They're looking for some bold examples of people who know what they believe, and they aren't afraid to articulate that.
And I think good preparation will elicit courage. When you hear an argument and you a stupid argument, and you know in your head there's 50 ways to tear that argument down, it's going to give you a little more courage. Reading that book, I go back. It's like one of my favorite books we just talked about, but by Vindel. What's his name?
Vishal Mangawaladi.
Yes, the Indian scholar. The book is called.
I got it here. Somewhere.
Yeah, it's called the book. The name of the title. The book title is "The Book That Changed the World." Talking about the Bible, and just how he connect biblical principles to human flourishing, to university, to scientific research, and to just sharing how the West, from the Eastern perspective, Indian perspective, how the West, because of Christianity, ended up having technology and prosperity that changed the world today. Gives me courage that when I hear these things, I'm like, oh, I can easily debunk that because of these are facts and data from a scholar. This is not like some just charismatic guy. He's a very, very well-researched person. Now you can engage with facts, data with data. That gives you courage.
So you arm yourself with truth.
Absolutely.
I saw a really fun clip of Charlie Kirk at Oxford. Here's all the best and brightest minds in the world that get into Oxford. And here's Charlie with no formal college education, but well-studied, hard worker.
Everything.
Yeah, I mean, a brilliant mind, and just absolutely destroying their whole ideology and doing it with boldness, like calling out things as perverted, wanting to rip out this perverted doctrine of DEI. I mean, here in a bastion of leftist, woke progressive nonsense, and he's just. But to your point, but he has trained and equipped himself for battle. And I think that's the calling. I've shared many times. It's not the truth isn't on our side. We just haven't done our homework. We haven't equipped ourselves with the truth to be able to withstand some of these ideologies. And so we get intimidated and we self-silence.
Well, I mean, I think, again, Christian higher education seminaries, like, teaches Greek and Hebrew. I've never been in a seminary, but I know people who've been in a seminary. A lot of good studying the Bible, but that area that connects Western Civ and connects the biblical principles to why we are the Constitution, why is the flourishing of man. I just feel like that is not taught really anywhere. I mean, I've been a Christian my whole life, and when I read that book, I was like, well, and I'm probably more well-studied in biblical worldview than most people. And when I read that, I was like, there's a whole other world out there. It just equips you to give you courage to not just speak out on this issue, but to go and advance medicine, to advance technology, to say this is God's gift to mankind for human flourishing.
Well, it goes back to the Great Commission, right? Discipling nations. Once you understand God's given us a mission, not only to reach people for Christ, but then to disciple them, to train them in truth, and then to see entire cultures transformed.
Yeah.
It elevates you, it supersizes you. You're not just a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, a nurse, whatever, an educator. You're a person who's been infused with a vision, a mission from the Lord to see that truth fill the earth, and it just energizes you in a powerful way. And I think we've got to get back to that sense of calling.
And mind you, Western Civ has been under attack for the last 40, 50 years. Like every worst thing, again, every movement, every civilization, there's nothing perfect. There's always bad people. There's always bad ideas. There's always weaknesses. But every weakness, every flaw of the Western Civ has been pointed out in every movie, song, music, teaching, whatever. Whereas Marxism and Eastern religions, it's been elevated like this amazing thing, right? So you take a microscope to all the bad things of Western Civ, and then you hide all the ignore. Yep. Not realizing Western Civ has contributed the greatest wealth and prosperity to mankind ever, and we never talk about it. We have to talk about it. My kids are going to read that book, study that book. My son's 11. I mean, once he's a couple years old, he's going to read that book, and we're going to go through it because they need to understand what really the Bible isn't just a bunch of funny stories. They are keys to human flourishing in a very practical way. When you go to university, if you want to study medicine or law or go into engineering, you realize, man, that's directly connected to your worship unto God. Right. I wish I was equipped with that when I was in high school and college and whatnot. I was nowhere.
There's no physics without God. There's no science without God.
There's no university. There's no even a facility dedicated to research and development.
Yeah. So. And like you say, we have so much. The fun part is like, all right, Lord, how do we reclaim all of this and begin to equip, like right here locally in our backyard, over which we have authority and power. So that's why I still have a big burden for education and for a lot of this discipleship and the getting people out into the world to see other countries and to feel the burden and the weight of the Great Commission. And then to have the courage to stand up and speak. And I think we're seeing that happen more and more and more. So once again, I want to encourage people, get online and register for our Flashpoint event that's coming up, and not that too distant of a future, or first week in October. So appreciate Charlie Kirk and TPUSA and what they're doing there and some of the fruit that's coming out of that movement.
And just on a side note, like even speaking about this data right here, like if this can't last, truth will burst forth at some point. And just watching some of Charlie Kirk's video and his messaging is basically there's a revival. Maybe not the revival we think of when we Christians think about revival, but there is a reigniting of truth and faith and wanting something bigger than themselves on college campus and young people, a longing for meaning and truth, and not the artificial and not the shallow relationships and not just pursue of money and fame and power, but real, something authentic and genuine.
Well, we were made for meaning. We can't live in a meaningless world. That's why the secular worldview eventually crumbles. You just can't live in a hopeless, meaningless, incoherent world. We ask questions. We want to know why, and that's because we're made in the image and likeness of God. We're looking for something that's intellectually satisfying, and as we talked about last podcast, that provides hope. That leads us to a bright future.
Yeah.
And the only worldview that does that is a Christian worldview, and the only person big enough to do that is Jesus. And so I'm with you. I think the times are ripe. We have to seize the moment. The left has overplayed their cards, and there's nothing there. It's nothing but chaos and doom and gloom and despair and depression, and it doesn't make sense. And so this is our opportunity to seize the moment and to make an impact. So we need to be praying, God, show us how to do that and give us the courage to do it. So anyway, thanks so much again for tuning in. This is always part of our highlight of our week, is to sit down and be able to share these discussions with you guys. And we'll look forward to seeing you next Thursday.